My name doesn't matter much anymore, but what I saw out there does. So I'll tell it the way it happened, and you can decide for yourself whether the humans are what the old warning said or something else entirely. I served aboard the Vessar Talon. In your tongue that means something close to long patience. She was a survey vessel, not a warship, understand that. We carried scientists, cartographers, a handful of security officers who mostly broke up arguments in the mess hall. We mapped dead stars and counted asteroids. That was the whole of it. Nobody signs onto a survey vessel expecting to die. I was the junior navigation officer, third shift, the boring shift. The one where you watch the same stretch of empty black for 6 hours and drink too much of the bitter root tea just to stay awake. That's what I was doing when the drive failed. Let me back up. I want you to understand where we were, because that part matters more than anything. We had crossed into the Kellen Reach. It's a region nobody goes to. Not because it's forbidden, there's nothing out there worth forbidding. It's just empty. A great cold gap between two spiral arms, hundreds of light years wide, where the stars thin out to almost nothing and the dark presses close on every side. Our captain, an old female named Sarutha, wanted to map a gravitational anomaly that some observatory had flagged decades ago. Career-making stuff, she said. A quiet corner of the galaxy nobody had ever charted properly. I remember she said that at the briefing. Nobody has ever been here, and I remember thinking it sounded lonely rather than exciting. The weather in deep space isn't weather, but we had a word for the way it felt out there. Hollow cold. You could feel it through the hull if you pressed your hand to the wall during a quiet cycle, not the temperature. The ship kept us warm, but the emptiness. Like the ship knew there was nothing for 1,000 years in any direction, and it didn't like it either. The sounds inside were small and familiar. The hum of the recyclers, the tick of the hull adjusting. Someone 2 decks down laughing at a joke I couldn't hear. Ordinary things. The last ordinary things, though I didn't know it yet. The drive failed at the 7th hour of my shift. There was no explosion. That's what people get wrong when they imagine these things. There was just a sound, a deep, wrong sound, like a great heart skipping, and then the lights on my console all turned amber at once. Then red. And then the low warble of the alarm that every crew member learns to fear more than any other, because it means the thing that moves you through the dark has stopped moving. I called the engine deck. No answer. Called again. Then Sarutha's voice came over the general channel, calm the way old captains are calm, which is scarier than panic because you know they're only calm because they've decided panic won't help. All stations report. We reported, navigation stable but drifting, life support nominal. Engineering, and there the silence stretched long enough that I felt my stomach turn over. Then the chief engineer, a young male named Dalm, came on. His voice was shaking. Captain, the primary core is gone, not damaged, gone. There's a hole in the housing where it should be. Nobody understood that at first. A drive core doesn't just vanish. But Dalm was right. When they finally got in there with hand lights, the containment chamber was empty and clean, the edges of the breach smooth as glass, as though something had reached in and simply removed the heart of our ship and closed the wound behind it. We never found out what did it. Some flaw in the anomaly we'd come to study, maybe. Some fold in space we brushed against without knowing. It doesn't matter now. What mattered then was simple and terrible. We were adrift in the emptiest place any of us had ever been, with no way to move, and the nearest inhabited system was 240 light-years away. Let me tell you what that number means, so you feel it the way we felt it. Our fastest distress beacon, running on the emergency cells, would take 11 years to reach the nearest listening post. 11 years for the message to arrive. Then however long for anyone to care, to organize, to send a ship. Then the ship would take years to reach us even at full drive. We ran the numbers on the bridge, all of us crowded around the console, and the youngest of us started doing the math out loud until Sarutha touched her shoulder and told her to stop. because the answer was longer than any of us would live. Our air would last 4 years if we were careful. Our food, 3. Our water could be recycled almost indefinitely, which was a cruel joke. We would die of thirst for nothing, breathless and starving in a ship full of clean water. I want you to sit with that, because I've had years to sit with it and it still catches me sometimes in the quiet. We were not going to be rescued. We were going to die slowly in the dark, in a place no one had ever been and no one would ever know how. The stars we could see from the bridge windows had died before our grandmothers were born. That's how far the light had traveled to reach us. We were ghosts among ghosts. Sarutha did what good captains do. She kept us busy. She rationed the food and told us the truth about it, which I respected her for. She didn't pretend. She organized shifts, kept the science teams working on the anomaly data as though it still mattered, because idle minds in a situation like ours turn dark fast. She let people grieve. She didn't lie to us. But she did one thing that I think in her heart she believed was pointless. She kept the distress beacon running, not the long-range one, that 11-year message. A second one, a wideband, all frequencies, all protocols call, screaming into every direction at once. The kind you send when you don't expect anyone to hear but you can't bear to be silent. She kept it running because, she said, the dark should at least know we were here. That someone had passed through and not gone quietly. I thought it was grief talking. I thought she was sending a message to no one. For 19 days I was right. The days blurred. I won't pretend they didn't. When you know the shape of your ending, time does strange things. Some hours crawled, some vanished. People got quiet, then loud, then quiet again. 2 of the scientists who had been together for years held a bonding ceremony in the observation lounge and the whole crew came, and for one evening we were almost happy, which was somehow the saddest part of all. I remember standing at the back of that ceremony, watching them and thinking, this is what we are. Even at the end, we reach for each other. I held on to that thought for a long time afterward. On the 19th day, I was on the bridge again. 3rd shift, though the shifts had stopped meaning much. Sarutha was there too. She didn't sleep well anymore. None of us did, sitting in her chair with her eyes closed, not sleeping, just resting in the way the old learned to do. And the beacon receiver chirped. I didn't understand it at first. It was a sound I'd never heard the receiver make, because in 19 days it had received nothing but static. I stared at it. Then I stared at it harder. Then I said, very quietly because I didn't trust my own voice, "Captain." She opened her eyes. "Captain, there's a response. On the beacon, something is responding." She was out of her chair and beside me faster than I'd seen her move in weeks. We both looked at the signal. It was weak. It was strange. A compression protocol none of our systems recognized. So old or so foreign that the translator matrix churned for nearly a minute trying to parse it. And then it resolved into text, and then into a rough approximation of speech, in a voice the computer built out of guesswork. The message was 7 words long. "We hear you, hold on, we're coming." I read it 3 times. I remember my hands were shaking. Sarutha put her hand flat on the console like she needed to feel that it was real. "Where?" she said. "Where is it coming from? What's their distance?" I ran the trace. And this is the part where my blood went cold, because when the number came back I didn't believe it, and I ran it again, and it came back the same. The signal was close, not 11 years close. Not even 11 days. The source was 4 light hours away, and closing at a speed our instruments could barely measure. Whatever had answered us was nearly on top of us already, and moving faster than anything we understood was possible. "That's not possible," I said. "Nothing moves that fast. Nothing. The signal must be corrupted. The distance is wrong." "Run it again," Sarutha said. I ran it again, same answer. And then a new thought occurred to me, and it wasn't relief. It was fear. Because in the empty places between the stars, A thing that answers a distress call and comes fast and comes strange is not always a rescuer. My people have stories about the deep dark. Everyone's people do. Things that hunt the drifting and the desperate. Things that use a dying ship's own hope as the bait in the trap. I said this to Sarutha, quietly, so the two other crew on the bridge wouldn't hear. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Maybe, but we are already dead, navigator. If it is a hunter, it only takes from us what the dark was going to take anyway. And if it is not," she looked at the 7 words still glowing on my console, "then I would rather die having believed someone was coming than die alone in the certainty that no one was." So we waited, and we watched the thing close the distance. I need to tell you about the humans now, about what we knew of them then before that day, because it shapes everything that came after. We knew of humans the way you know of a strange animal from a far country, through stories, most of them second-hand, most of them frightening. Humanity was a young species, young and by the reckoning of the older civilizations, dangerous. They had clawed their way off their homeworld in a single violent century, gone from primitive to spacefaring so fast that the galactic conquered still hadn't finished deciding what to make of them. The stories the older species told about humans were not kind. They said humans were relentless, that a human would keep coming when any sensible creature would stop, that humans had a strange, almost broken relationship with fear, that they felt it like everyone did, but then they simply overrode it, went forward anyway. That there was something in the human mind that could not accept a lost cause, that would throw itself against an impossible thing again and again, past all reason, past the point of sense. The word the older species used for humans in their private councils, translated roughly as the ones who do not know when to quit. And there was one story above all others, the one every species in the conquered told in some version, the story of the human distress protocol. You see, most civilizations have rules about rescue, sensible rules. You weigh the cost, you weigh the risk. If a ship is too far, if the odds are too poor, if reaching the stranded would endanger the rescuers, then you do not go. It's not cruelty, it's arithmetic. You do not throw good lives after lost ones. Every sane species in the galaxy understood this. Every species except one. The humans, the story went, had a rule burned so deep into their culture that it was almost religion. A rule from their homeworld, from their oldest days at sea, carried up into the stars unchanged. You answer the call. You always answer the call, not if it's convenient, not if the math works out. Always. A human ship that received a distress signal and did not respond was a thing so shameful, so unthinkable, that human law and human conscience alike treated it as a kind of murder. The older species thought this was madness. Beautiful, maybe, in the abstract, but madness. A civilization that would bankrupt itself, that would risk its warships and its best crews to save strangers who would probably die anyway. That would answer any call from anyone without weighing the cost. It couldn't last. It was inefficient. It was irrational. That's what they said about the humans, irrational. I had heard all these stories. I'd half believed them and half dismissed them as the way older cultures always talk about younger ones. I never expected to test them. But as that impossible signal closed the distance, and the translator finished parsing the ship's identity beacon, I read the words aloud to Sarutha, and my mouth went dry. It was a human ship, a human warship. And it was coming for us at a speed that should have torn it apart. They arrived on the 20th day. I was on the bridge for it. Most of the crew was by then, because word had spread and no one wanted to face this moment alone. Sarutha stood at the center of it all, calm as stone, her hand resting on the back of her chair. We saw the light first, a point of hard white light where there had been nothing, growing, resolving. And then the ship itself dropped out of its impossible speed and into normal space, and every one of us went silent. It was smaller than I expected. That surprised me. In the stories, human warships were monsters, city-sized things bristling with weapons. This one was modest, lean, maybe a third the length of our survey vessel. Gray-hulled, scarred, patched in places where old damage had been welded over rather than replaced. It looked used. It looked like a working tool, not a trophy. There was writing on the hull, painted by hand, letters our translators rendered as a name. Persistent. That was the ship's name. Persistent. I have thought about that name a great deal in the years since. The channel opened before we could hail them. A face appeared on our main display, the first living human any of us had ever seen. She was smaller than I'd imagined, too. Her fur, hair, I learned later, only on the head, was cut short and gone gray at the edges. Her face was lined. Her eyes were dark and steady and tired, the eyes of someone who had done hard things for a long time and expected to do more. She spoke. The translator caught up a half-second behind. "This is Captain Reyes of the human vessel Persistent. We received your distress call. Report your situation, how many aboard, what's your air and water status, and is anyone hurt? We'll take it from there." No greeting. No ceremony. No questions about who we were, whether we were friend or enemy, whether we were worth the trouble. Just, "How many, what do you need, we'll take it from there." Sarutha answered. She gave the numbers, the crew count, the drive loss, the air, the food, the 240 light years to the nearest help. She was precise and honest, captain to captain. When she finished, there was a pause, and in that pause I watched the human captain's face and I saw something move across it. Not pity, not shock, something harder and warmer at once. She turned her head and spoke to someone off-screen, quick and low, and I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear the tone, and the tone was, "Give me options now." Then she turned back to us. "Understood. Here's where we are." And she told us the truth, the way Sarutha had told us the truth, and I loved her a little for it even then. "Your ship's too big for us to tow at speed, we'd tear both hulls apart trying. And we can't fit your whole crew aboard Persistent for a long haul, not with the life support we've got. So here's what we're going to do instead." She leaned toward the screen. "We carry a spare drive core, emergency unit for exactly this kind of thing. It's not rated for a ship your size, but my engineer says she can make it hold if she nurses it. We're going to install it in your ship. Then we escort you to the nearest port, slow and careful, both of us together. It'll take us 3 months. That's 3 months of my crew's time, 3 months off our own mission, and a drive core we may need ourselves before we get home." She said all of this plainly, laying out the cost, every bit of it. And then she said the thing I will remember until the day I die. "And before any of you ask, yes, we're sure. We don't leave people in the dark, not ever, not for any reason. So stop worrying about whether we'll change our minds. We won't. Now let's get to work." I looked at Sarutha. Sarutha was looking at the screen with an expression I had never seen on her face in all the years I'd served under her. Her composure had cracked just slightly, just at the edges of her eyes. Because she understood, as I did, what we were being offered. Not a calculated rescue where the math worked out. The math did not work out. It cost them everything and gained them nothing. They were spending 3 months, a spare drive and real risk to their own lives, for a ship full of strangers they'd never met, from a species they had no treaty with, in the emptiest corner of the galaxy where no one would ever have known if they'd simply flown on by. No one would have known. That's the thing. If the Persistent had received our call and quietly continued on its way, no court would have tried them. No one would ever have found our drifting bones. They could have let us die with perfect deniability and a clear record. And it never once occurred to them to do it. I'll end part 1 here. At the moment the humans crossed over. The first of them came aboard 6 hours later, in suits scarred and patched like their ship. Their engineer led a broad, quick-moving human who took one look at the empty wound where our drive core had been, whistled a low note through her teeth, and said something the translator rendered as, "Well, somebody made off with your whole heart, didn't they? All right, Let's build you a new one." That was where the real story started. But you'll have to wait for part 2 to hear what happened when the humans got to work, and what happened 3 weeks later, when the dark decided it wasn't finished with us yet, and the humans had to decide all over again whether some things are worth dying for. They decided fast. They always do. The engineer's name was Keswick. She never told us her first name. Humans use 2, sometimes 3, but she went by the 1, and everyone on her crew called her Chief. She was the first human I ever spoke to face, and I want to tell you about her, because everything that came after runs through her hands. She came aboard with 4 others and a crate of tools that hummed and clicked in a language of their own. She moved through our ship like she'd built it, quick, sure, ducking under our low doorways without complaint, even though they were clearly made for a taller frame. She got to the drive chamber, looked at that clean, empty wound where our heart used to be, and she stopped. I was with her. Sarutha had assigned me as liaison because I'd been the one on the beacon, and because my translator settings were tuned closest to their speech. So I saw Keswick's face when she looked at what had happened to us. I'd braced for disgust, or that older species look, the weighing look, the one that measures whether you're worth the trouble. I'd seen it my whole career from the elder races, that flat, cold arithmetic behind the eyes. Keswick didn't have it. She looked at the empty chamber the way you'd look at a wound on a living thing. She reached out one gloved hand and touched the smooth edge of the breach, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said low, almost to herself, 19 days you sat with this, knowing, she shook her head, that's the part that gets me. Not the dying, the waiting to die, she turned to me. You held together better than I would've, I'll tell you that for nothing. I didn't know what to say. In my experience, the strong did not admit weakness to the weak. It was not done. But the humans, I would learn, said what they meant. All of them. It was almost frightening at first, how little space there was between their thoughts and their mouths. An elder race diplomat would spend an hour saying nothing with great elegance. A human would look at you and tell you the truth and then get back to work. Keswick got back to work. Installing a human drive core in a ship it was never meant for is, I am told, close to impossible. Their engineer told me later, much later, when we knew each other well enough to laugh, that if she'd filed the proper request through her own fleet's engineering board, they'd have denied it flatly. Wrong core class, wrong hull tolerance, wrong species power architecture, every specification a mismatch. So I didn't file it, she said, and grinned that human grin, all teeth, which I'd learned by then meant warmth and not threat. Easier to apologize than ask. She and her 4 worked in shifts around the clock. Hours worked beside them. It was the first time in 19 days I'd seen my crew move with purpose, and the change in them was something I'll never forget. Dawn, our young chief engineer, the one whose voice had shaken when he found the empty chamber, he came alive again. He and Keswick argued constantly. 2 engineers from 2 species with no shared training and no shared tools, shouting over each other through straining translators, drawing diagrams on the wall in Greece, and I have never in my life seen 2 people understand each other so completely while agreeing on almost nothing. At one point they hit a problem that stopped them both cold. The human core ran on a power cycle that pulsed, surged and rested, where our systems ran on a smooth, continuous draw. Feed the pulse into our grid and it would burn out every relay on the ship. Smooth it out and the core would choke and die. They stood in front of the half-built thing, the 2 of them, silent for the first time in days. And then Dawn, my quiet, frightened Dawn, said something I didn't fully follow, something about our recycler buffers, the great tanks that smoothed out fluctuations in the water system. And Keswick went very still. And then she laughed, this huge barking laugh, and grabbed Dawn by both shoulders and shook him and said, "You beautiful idiot, you want to run my drive through your plumbing." They ran the drive through our plumbing. The buffer tanks caught the pulse, smoothed it, fed it clean into the grid. It should not have worked. Every engineering board in the galaxy would have said it could not work. It worked because two people who refused to quit put their heads together and refused also to be sensible. That's a human thing, I've decided. The refusal to be sensible, when sense says lie down and die. It took 11 days to build our new heart. When they lit it, when the core spun up and the amber lights on my console turned, one by one, back to the soft green of a ship that was alive again. The whole crew was on the bridge, and both crews cheered together, ours and theirs, in two languages that meant the same thing. Captain Reyes came aboard for that. It was the first time I'd seen her off her own ship. She was smaller in person than on the screen, and older, and there was a stiffness to how she moved that spoke of an old injury never quite healed. She and Sarutha stood together at the front of the bridge and watched the light come back, and they didn't say much, two old captains from two far corners of the dark. But I was close enough to hear what Sarutha said. She said, "You spend 3 months in a drive core for strangers. I do not understand your people, but I will spend the rest of my life grateful I do not have to." And Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that I've turned over in my mind more times than I can count. She said, "It's not for you, not really. I mean, it is. We're glad it's you, glad you're alive. But we don't answer the call for the people we're saving." She looked out the window at the dark, at all that empty black pressing on the glass. "We answer it because of who we have to be when we get home. A crew that flies past a dying ship isn't a crew anymore. It's just a machine full of cowards moving through space. We answer the call so we can still look at each other, so we're still people when it's over." She turned back to Sarutha. "You'd have done the same. Anybody worth saving would." I don't think that last part was true. I've known plenty of my own people who'd have flown past. Sensible people, people who could do arithmetic. But I understood, standing there, why the humans frightened the elder races so badly. It wasn't their weapons. It was this. A species that had decided, all the way down to the root of itself, that some costs you simply pay and you don't count them and you don't complain because the alternative is to become something you can't live with. You cannot bargain with a people like that. You cannot frighten them off a thing they've decided is right. They will come and come and come, and the coming will cost them, and they will pay it and come again. The elder races called that madness. I've started to think it might be the only sane thing in the whole cold galaxy. We set out 3 days later. 2 ships in formation, slow and careful, the Persistent riding a half-mile off our flank like a scarred gray guardian, our jury-rigged heart beating steady between us. 3 months to port. Keswick stayed aboard our ship to nurse the drive. A few of ours crossed to theirs to learn their systems. The 2 crews had become one crew, more or less, in the way that shared work in the dark will do to people. I thought the danger was behind us. It wasn't. It came on the 22nd day of the crossing. I was on the bridge, 3rd shift, of course. Some habits outlived the reasons for them when the instruments went strange. Not the drive. The drive was fine, purring along on Dahlm's plumbing. It was the space that went strange. The same wrongness we'd felt just before the core vanished, 19 days into our nightmare. A pull in the readings. A fold in the black. The anomaly, or something like it, some cousin of it, some second mouth of the same dark thing was opening again, and this time it was opening right in our path. I hit the alarm. Sarutha was on the bridge in seconds. Reyes's voice came over the joint channel a half-breath later, sharp and instant, a captain who slept with one ear open. Persistent has it too. Big gravitational shear, dead ahead, growing fast. Same signature as your core loss. A pause. It's between us and port, and it's spreading. We can't go around it in time. It's opening faster than we can steer. The bridge went cold and quiet. Everyone understood. Whatever had reached into our ship and stolen its heart was opening again, and this time both ships were in its reach, ours and theirs. The humans had come all this way, spent all they'd spent, and now the same dark that nearly killed us was going to take them too. Both ships. Everyone. And then Keswick spoke, from down in our drive chamber on the open line. Her voice was tight. "Chief here, the shear'll hit your ship first, you're heavier, you pull harder, it'll take you the way it took your core. Unless," she stopped. "Unless something heavier and hotter draws it off first. It's a gravity phenomenon. It goes for mass and energy. It goes for the biggest, loudest thing in range." There was a silence then that I have never forgotten, because we all understood what she was describing. Not a plan to escape, a plan to bait. To run one ship hard and hot and heavy straight at the opening thing, engines screaming, drawing all that hunger onto itself, so the other ship could slip past the edge while the dark was busy feeding. And the Persistent was smaller, lighter, faster, it could make the edge, our ship couldn't. But their ship, run at full burn with its core overloaded, could be made louder than ours. Hotter, heavier in the only way the dark could taste. I did the arithmetic before anyone said it out loud. The bait ship would not make it out. Whatever drew that thing onto itself was not coming back. Ray's understood it too. Of course she did. She was quiet for one breath, too. Then she said, calm as still water, "Persistent will draw it off. Get your ship to the edge and burn hard the second we've got its attention. Don't wait for us. Don't slow down. That's an order, Captain. Even if you don't take my orders, take that one." Sarutha said, "No, fast, fierce. No, you've spent enough. We'll draw it off. It's our ship hour. Your ship's too slow and too fragile to survive the run, and you've got twice my crew aboard." Ray's cut in, and her voice never rose, and that was the terrible thing, how level she stayed. "It's numbers, Captain. It's just numbers. My ship, fewer lives, better odds of buying you the time. You know I'm right. Don't waste the seconds arguing. I've made harder calls than this." And then, and this is the part I have never been able to tell without stopping, Keswick's voice came back on the line. From our drive chamber. From aboard our ship. "Chief to Persistent. I'm staying on the alien ship to hold the drive together through the burn. Somebody's got to nurse it or it'll shake apart at full throttle." A pause. "Captain, it's been an honor. Get 'em moving." She was choosing to live. She was on the ship that would survive. And I heard over the line Ray's voice catch just once, just barely, before she said, rough, "Understood, Chief. Take care of my people over there." My people. She meant us. We'd been her people for 11 days and a 3-week crossing, and she meant it, and she was about to die for it. I won't stretch out what happened next, because it happened fast, the way the worst things do. The Persistent peeled off our flank. I watched it on the display, that scarred gray ship, that lean patched working tool of a thing, and I watched it light its engines up past every safe threshold, past red, past the numbers that mean a drive is tearing itself apart. It ran straight at the opening dark. It got loud. On our instruments it flared hotter and heavier than anything, a single furious point of defiance screaming into the fold, and the dark, the hungry fold in space, turned. I felt it turn. The pull that had been reaching for us swung away, swung toward the louder, hotter, closer thing. The way a predator turns from the herd toward the one that runs at it head-on. "Now," Sarutha said, "burn, burn now." Dawn and Keswick burned. Our jury-rigged heart, our stolen core running through our plumbing, screamed up to full and held Keswick's hands on it the whole way, I know, because I heard her over the line, talking to the drive like it was a frightened animal. "Easy, easy, hold together. Hold, that's it." And our ship lunged for the edge of the fold and made it. Barely. The dark clawed at our stern and caught nothing but our wake, because all its hunger was pointed the other way now, pointed at the Persistent, pointed at the ship that had thrown itself into the mouth of the thing so we could live. The last I saw of the Persistent was a flare of white light where the fold closed. No wreckage, no debris. The same clean vanishing that had taken our core, 19 days into a nightmare that felt like a lifetime ago. The dark took the ship whole, and the woman who commanded it, and every soul aboard who had come all this way for strangers and paid the last full price without a breath of hesitation. And then the fold was gone. The space ahead was empty and calm. The way to port was open. The bridge was silent. Keswick came up from the drive chamber a while later. She'd held it together. She'd saved the burn. She'd lived. And she stood at the back of our bridge and looked at the empty stars where her ship had been, and she didn't make a sound. Not one. She just stood there. And after a long time, Sarutha crossed the bridge and stood beside her, and the two of them looked out at the dark together, captain and chief, the last of two crews that had briefly been one. We made port 2 months later. Keswick brought the Persistent home in a different way than she'd hoped. She carried its story, and its logs, and the names of everyone aboard, and she stood in front of her own fleet's board and told them what Rays had done and why. They didn't discipline her for the unauthorized drive install. I heard later that they added the Persistent to some human list of honored ships, and that Rays's name is spoken now in the way humans speak the names of their best dead. Not with mourning, exactly, but with a kind of fierce pride, the way you'd speak of someone who was exactly who they meant to be, right up to the end. I've thought about that a great deal. The humans don't grieve their heroes the way we do. We would have wept and torn our robes. They square their shoulders and say the name and mean that's how it's done. And then they go out and do it again, the next time the call comes, because the call always comes and they always answer. I asked Keswick once, years after we stayed in touch. She came to my bonding ceremony and got joyfully, alarmingly drunk on our root wine. I asked her whether Rays had been afraid at the end, whether any of them were. And Keswick looked at me and she said, "Course they were afraid. We're always afraid. Fear's not the thing." She turned her cup in her hands. "Fear just tells you the thing you're about to do matters. You feel it and you nod at it and then you do the thing anyway. That's the whole trick. That's the only trick there is." She shrugged. Rays was scared, and she went anyway. That's not the opposite of scared. That's what brave means. There's no brave without the scared underneath it. I've carried that with me all these years. So that's the story. That's what I saw out there in the emptiest corner of the dark, where no one had ever been and no one would ever have known. I've heard all the things the elder races say about humanity, that they're reckless, that they don't know when to quit, that they'll ruin themselves someday, answering calls that aren't worth the cost, throwing their best lives after strangers, refusing the simple sane arithmetic that keeps a civilization safe and small. Maybe they will. Maybe that's exactly how humanity ends someday, burning itself out answering one call too many. But I was on the ship that got answered. I was the one on the beacon on the 19th day when the 7 words came back out of a dark that owed us nothing. "We hear you. Hold on. We're coming." I was there when a ship a third our size and full of scars turned itself into bait, so a hold full of strangers could see another sunrise. And I'll tell you what I believe now at the end of it. The dark between the stars is vast and cold, and it does not care whether you live or die. That's the truth of the galaxy, and every sensible species has learned it and made its peace with it and grown small and careful and safe. The humans never made that peace. The humans looked at all that cold indifference, all that endless dark that swallows ships whole and closes the wound behind them without a ripple. And they decided that they would care, since the universe wouldn't. That's all it is in the end. That's the whole of what makes them what they are. In a galaxy that answers no one, the humans answer everyone. They always answer. And I have prayed every day since that they never learn to stop.